Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here. I know that your time is valuable, and I intend to make sure you get lots of value out of this episode as well. And I have no doubt that's going to be the case today. We're talking with Traci DeForge about how law firms can benefit from podcasting. So welcome, Traci. It's great to have you here.
It is fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast and to have a great conversation of talking about podcasting and how lawyers can use podcasts. One of my favorite things. So
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the conversation because I bet about a lot of our listeners are probably resistant to that idea or have never considered it. So, but first, for those of you who don't know Traci, she's the founder of Produce Your Podcast. It's a premier podcast consulting and production agency, and she's got over 3 decades of experience in broadcast media, executive management, Fortune 500 business consulting. And she has had a very diverse career spanning everything from startups to Fortune 500 giants like Google and Hilton. So she's quite renowned for business development insights that really drive innovation. So keep tuned here, get a pad and pen ready, and get ready to get some downloads of some valuable information. So I'd love if you could tell us to start, Traci, just a little bit about yourself, how you came to pursue this career.
Sure. Well, I think what I want to say first is that I've always loved the platform of audio as a medium. And I worked for 20 plus years in the broadcast radio industry, primarily on the sales and management side. My career I was so blessed because I worked 2 decades for the same broadcast radio company.
Oh,
And so I was able to literally move through the ranks from an account executive to a sales manager, general manager, ultimately a market manager. But what that allowed me to be able to have the luxury of doing was not only learning a lot about the ins and outs of the operations of broadcast radio and broadcast radio stations, but also a little bit about a lot of different businesses because we had so many different businesses that were advertisers on my last management job was running 12 stations. And so that was news, sports, pop, country, rock, all different formats, which lent to getting to know a lot about a lot of different businesses. So that I think was the catalyst for me to then really pursue business development strategy as a consulting career. And the two really came together when I wanted to start my own podcast. And I think I knew too much. So this was back in 2015. I wanted a broadcast quality radio show. I wanted it to be a podcast. And at that time, there were no full service agencies out there that really could help you launch and grow a podcast. And so I pulled my team of people that I used to work with in broadcast radio. I pulled them together to help me launch my first podcast. And then as a result of that, really realized this is the way I can bring the two things I love the most, radio and business development, and merge them together for other business owners like me who wanted a podcast but didn't want to have to do anything but show up and record. So that's how Produce Your Podcast was born.
That's awesome. And I love that you talk about business development because I bet that many of our listeners out there are thinking, podcast, I don't have time for that. So disabuse them of that notion, Traci. How can law firms benefit from podcasting?
Right. Well, I really appreciate you pointing that out because honestly, our biggest differentiator, because now fast forward almost 9 years, that there weren't a lot of full service agencies then, right? But now fast forward, there are a lot of more people who are in the podcast production space. But our differentiator has always been, and it will always be, that we focus on utilizing a podcast as a business development tool. And for law firms, it is especially helpful because you get the opportunity for people to identify with you as a human, not just as the type of law that you practice. And let's face it, like a lot of times lawyers can be the brunt of jokes. They can be boxed into stereotypes. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
That's for sure.
And the beautiful thing about a podcast, whether it's audio or audio and video, is that people get to see the human side of what it is that you do and how you do it. And you can do that through not only telling your own stories, your own case studies, but even if it's appropriate, having clients actually that you've worked with come on and share transformational experiences that they have experienced as a result of working with you. And so your audience, not only do they get to learn a little bit more about your specific area of law so much, but also like what it would be like if they needed your expertise. They could connect and be like, oh, like I like her, or I get him,
Yeah.
or he would be my kind of attorney.
Yeah. Well, I think this is where a lot of lawyers drop the ball, and frankly, why they end up becoming very disenchanted with the practice of law. It's this grind mentality of going forward, just practicing. And post COVID, I don't know if you've seen this, Tracy. I imagine people are looking for much more human connection from their, from their professionals as well. Has that been your experience?
It has been my experience. And I think too that it's become more difficult just from a practical marketing strategy side, no matter really what industry that you're in. But what was working before the
Yeah.
pandemic in terms of how to market and reach people and how to talk about your business and what that meant has really changed dramatically post pandemic, because the way we do business has changed. The way
Yeah.
we look at who we want to do business with has changed, and the outcomes of how we want to engage with people's, and especially service based businesses, like that
Yeah.
human connection component is just
Yeah.
increased exponentially in terms of priority. And there's, again, no better way to get to know who you are and how you communicate and your philosophies and what you're aligned with and what you're not aligned with than having a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And podcast gives you that opportunity to have a conversation that people can almost like be a fly on the wall for.
Yeah. I love that. And in terms of nuts and bolts, then, like, how can podcasts be a tool for growth in terms of, lead generation or improving those conversion rates, things like that?
Right. So I'm probably better at storytelling based on the nature of what I do. But like, let's say, for example, we have a client who she is a divorce attorney and she also does mediation. And I recently had the opportunity to connect with her last week. As a matter of fact, her podcast is Doing Divorce Different. Host is Lisa
Oh,
Koski. And Lisa and I
like
had a conversation, and she told me that 60% of her clients she is now getting from her podcast. But the best part was, as she said,
wow.
and those are the best clients because they will come to me and say back to me things that they heard me say on the podcast.
Yeah.
So what I want to really specify about that is like, that's a very specific niche, divorce.
Yeah.
Her philosophy is about doing divorce in a way that's different, that's healthier, that's productive, that's not, necessarily all the negative things we think about a divorce.
Yeah.
But also geographically, as a lawyer, you have certain geographic restrictions. So it's really nice to know that not only are you able to reach the niche, but then the specific people that are in the niche, and then geographically where they are.
Yeah.
So I think, in her case, that's been working really well. And again, on a counterpoint, but still similar, is that we also have a podcast called The Amicable Divorce Expert. So same context, right? But
Yeah.
completely different podcast content. The Amicable Divorce Expert, she's a mediator in California, but she uses her podcast, like she'll talk about celebrity divorces, for example, and
Yeah.
how she'll showcase her mediation skills by breaking down high profile cases and being able to really, again, showcase her mediation skills. Or she'll talk about personality disorders and how to divorce a narcissist. And so like I use those two very different examples in terms of their context of how they're approaching their podcast, but they're both using them for lead generation and converting people to utilize them for their specific services.
Yeah. And that gives me hope. I mean, as you know, this podcast is called Practicing with Purpose, and it's trying to encourage lawyers to show up differently, right? To practice with more heart. And it sounds like certainly both of those clients, what a great way to approach it, rather than that dog eat dog sort of the stress that comes with being in constant fight mode. I love both those titles. So kudos to you
Right.
and to them.
Thank you. One thing I will like to say about that though is if you're practicing with purpose, I think is so valuable in terms of just, heart-centered approach to law and to the different areas of your practicing. But in terms of the podcast also, like it was a very good jumping off point, especially for Judith, who is the host of the Amicable Divorce Expert.
Yeah.
She used her podcast as a platform to expand her speaking engagements, which I think is something that you probably wouldn't normally think about. So she's been on stages. She's a heart healthy divorce is like something that she's gone into, expanded her demographics by going in and speaking to corporations to help navigate when their employees are going through a difficult time. She actually did a TEDx talk on the subject. So I want people to think about as they might be encouraged to do a podcast podcast not only for lead generation, but also to expand the possibilities for thought leadership, for being able to have subject matter expertise in areas, and being able to be a dynamic presenter and speaker on stages to really build your visibility, and then ultimately leads and sales from that. But that visibility piece, I think, is such a natural benefit of having a podcast.
And also a nice balance, right? I mean, get our nose out of the books, get out of that sort of courtroom constant fight mode, and be able to have something a little different where you're actually engaging with people and in a more human way, as you say. Now, for those who are still, not sitting on the fence or saying, yeah, but what about the money? What about that lost time? Beyond advertising, what are some other ways you can monetize a podcast?
Well, again, such a great question. So, and I'm better at the story. So, speaking of podcasting for purpose and law with purpose, so we produce a show called the Nonprofit Council. So, May Harris, who is the host of that, her whole law firm is For Purpose Law Group. But the podcast that she developed, Nonprofit Council, is a way to actually help people who are starting nonprofits to be able to know more about. She wrote a book, so the podcast is really helpful in promoting the book, so for generating revenues around the book, but also creating a course and a community for people who want to start a nonprofit organization but have no idea where to start, and may not have the budget right now to actually engage the services of a full-time attorney in her full-time law group, but or maybe they just want to create or generate more interest or know more about it before they go ahead and hire an attorney. So there's the possibility of monetization through online courses, products, and services if you have those, or building that audience first to then write that book. So a lot of times people will come to us because they have an idea of a book and they want to write it, but they literally haven't taken the time to sit down and actually write the book. So we encourage them to do the podcast, because then guess what? You're doing the podcast, you're talking about what you want to ultimately write in the chapters of the book, and then you have the transcriptions. It actually becomes a more time efficiency solution, because you're generating and creating all of this content by showing up and recording one time. And then you have transcripts and all this to collect to then turn that into a book.
Yeah, I love that idea of the book. I think it gives you credibility, certainly for lawyers out there, and it opens up so many different doors for people as well. And it's seen as a valuable service for prospective clients out there, which I think sets you apart from the competition. So smart all around. Now, what is involved in launching and producing a show? Because I'm sure there's a lot of resistance with people thinking about all their busy, billable hours. So what can they expect?
I love the way you position that question, because that was my biggest concern about billable hours for my consulting business when I started my own podcast. I was like, I want a broadcast quality show, and I want to be able to release it consistently, and I want it to reach my audience, but I didn't want to focus on it, right? I just wanted to show up and record and have the rest done for me. And again, at that point in time, there wasn't anything else out there like that. So that's why I created Producer Podcast. But that is what we specialize in. So we work with you, and it's not just limited to us now. Like I said, there's a lot of people out there. The main things you want to pay attention to is you want to work with somebody who pays attention on the front end to helping you develop the strategy, because we, in essence, just talked about a couple of different things. We talked about the type of podcast, like with whether or not you want to focus on celebrity divorces or case studies or heart-centered tips for practicing, right? So you want to have a strategy for how your content reaches people. Then you want to have that monetization strategy. How are you going to monetize it? How are you going to get a return on your investment? Are you going to do that through traditional advertising and sponsorships? Or are you going to do that through selling your own products and services, a combination? And then the format of the show itself, don't underestimate how important it is to work with a strategist to build a show that works for your personality, and also is something that's sustainable for you to maintain, because you don't want to just activate something and then have it fade and go away. And then having special content segments, for example, or calls to action that get people to continue the conversation with you. So whoever you're working with, you want to make sure that there is a front-end discovery strategy type piece to help you build out the business development side, as well as the content format and how you're going to monetize it. And then you need a professional to really help you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. There's a lot of information out there on the internet about how to launch a podcast. And I put that in quotes, not because you can't benefit from it, but there are a lot of things that are behind the scenes that are really important foundational pieces. You want to make sure it's categorized right. You want to make sure that you get it on the right platforms. Like you're on Spotify, you're on Apple, you're connected to YouTube. So you need someone to really walk you through, or in our case, do that for you so that your pieces for growth, the foundation is set up for you. And then probably even more importantly than all of that is the ongoing piece, because once it's up and going, that's exciting and fun. And we launched a podcast, and go listen to our podcast or watch our podcast. But to be able to grow the show needs specific strategy and support and ongoing technical support and that type of thing. So I love our model. I'm biased because we built it, but I love our model because we walk you through every single step of the way. And literally all you have to do is just show up and create your content, but have fun doing it. And all those other concerns are really taken care of for you.
I am a big fan of done for you. I suspect most lawyers are. And you talked about after the launch. I'm glad you raised that, because like, how do you sustain interest post-launch? It's one thing to have that enthusiasm. You reach out to everybody you know, but then what are some tips for how you sustain that post-launch interest in the podcast?
Right. Such a great question. And so you nailed it initially. So usually the first round of outreach are through your network that you know. So LinkedIn, works really well for lawyers in terms of a growth tool. Making sure that your show description is SEO optimized and your titles. There's a lot of again, that's why you really want to work with a professional, because you want to make sure that those foundational pieces set you up for success to be discovered by people like I'm looking for a podcast about divorce. I'm looking for a podcast about injury law. I'm looking for a podcast, so you want to be able to be found in those areas. So once you've done the initial outreach to your network, you want to go outside of that, right? A lot of that is done through correct SEO optimization and things like that. It's also about making sure that your content leaves your listeners feeling lighter and smarter. That's something that you really want to think about, like what's in it for them, not necessarily, we've talked a lot about what's in it for the lawyer, but also thinking about what's in it for the person who's going to be willing to stop down and spend 30, 40 minutes of their time or, listening to you. So you want to make sure that your content, and this is a term that we use, it's like people want to feel lighter, smarter. They want to go on their next Zoom call. It used to be the water cooler moment. They're coming back, but for now, you want to be able to get on your next Zoom call and be like, hey, I don't know if you realize this or not, but did you know that XYZ? So it's that shareable piece of information, that nugget, and then providing something that's tactical, maybe wrapping up with a tip or something actionable that somebody who has heard you can then take action that makes transformation in their own journey, or something happen that helps them in their path of what it is, the pain point they're trying to solve. But tactical growth pieces are totally different. I'm not sure I answered your question specifically. So I'll also say tactically, you really want to leverage the content repurposing that podcasts give you. So I mentioned that before around the book, but you can transcribe the episode, then you can turn it into a blog post. You can turn it into an article. LinkedIn specifically is really great for that. So once you record your podcast, you have someone supporting you, they can transcribe it. They can have an article written. LinkedIn has its own newsletter feature that you can then convert it into a newsletter, having it on your website, using it as, if you're using it as a lead generation tool, you can send links to the episodes through direct messages. I mean, there are lots of tactical growth things that can be done to continue to grow the show.
That's great. I love that idea about repurposing. And again, I think that's something that'll be attractive to our audience, because they like wherever you can take one piece of time spent and be able to get multiple benefits of the ripple effect of that. I'm sure a big fan of that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but like for me, I don't mind showing up and talking for an hour or 30 minutes. But if you ask me to sit down and write the blog post or write the article, like I have to be in a specific zone, like a mindset for that. But like in something like what we're doing today, I can go from doing an operations meeting with my team to guesting on a podcast to then doing a client call back to back. And it's not affecting my day in terms of my mindset. But then you and I now both will have this piece of content that I can take and repurpose to my audience. You can take it and repurpose to your audience. And we're just having a nice conversation. It's not taxing us.
Well, I love the idea about articles because those articles can then also be repurposed as, info bulletins to your clients or, posting up on a website so that again, you're a firm that's different because you are giving to the audience, which is something that historically lawyers were not known for, and I think are just starting to get on that bandwagon. So one of
Right.
the things that I often, that prompted me, frankly, to start this podcast is how we've defined success, right? In the legal community, particularly, success is being defined on such a competitive model. And you've talked a couple of times now about giving to the audience, which I love. So I'd be interested, Traci, in your definition of success. How do you define it?
Let me ask specifically in terms of the podcasting being a success for the business owner, for the lawyer, or what
I,
what
I
what
would
do you
say
mean
generally,
exactly in
like if
terms of
you're looking at, well, both actually, now that you say that, what for you would be signs of success for a podcast, but even in the bigger picture, how would you encourage this listening audience to define success?
Sure. So I think that if you're looking at defining success from the podcast perspective, the one thing, and this is why I was mentioning it's so important to work with someone on the front end before you launch your show around the developmental side of the strategy,
Yeah.
because what your end game is and how you define success is going to be completely different than how someone else is going to define success. Coming back to the example of if you ultimately want to get on more stages, have more visibility, have more thought leadership in your niche, speaking at conference, things like that. I mean, the podcast is the new speakers bureau. So people are going through and we're actually even recommending like if you host a podcast, make sure on your LinkedIn profile that it's listed that you host a podcast, because that's where people are looking for
Uh,
speakers now. So if your end game is to get on more stages, then that's how you're going to define your
yeah.
ROI or your success. If your definition of success is getting more clients, then that's going to be that top of funnel visibility down to leads, down to sales. And you want to have a specific strategy. And that's going to be fundamentally based on what your call to action is, what you're asking people to do after they consume your content. And if your definition of success is, I just want to generate way more content, content is king. I want more social media content. I want more blogs. I want more articles. And I don't want to have to do a lot more,
Yeah.
then that's successful, right? So it's not, but I guess the one big thing I want to reiterate is downloads does not always equal success. You have to define what success means to you and then create the strategy and implement the strategy connected with that. Because we've seen people that get less than 1,000 downloads an episode that are converting clients and sales, and in some
Yeah.
cases, average of 300 downloads, and they have gotten on stages and
Yeah.
really increased their bottom line. So I really encourage people not to attach downloads to success when it comes to your podcast, because whatever your outcome is going to be different.
Yeah.
In terms of just general success and how podcasts can contribute to that, I think there's no more powerful thing in the world than to have your voice heard and have people be able to hear your side of the story, your perspective of your side of the story. Have be able, especially one of the most popular podcasts are true crime.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people want to hear the stories, they want to hear the backstories, they want to hear the things that you don't get to know so much if you're not in the moment or in the context of the conversations. And to me, the reason why I love podcasting so much is because you can make an impact. Like what you share on a podcast can literally change someone's life.
Yeah.
As simple as, for me, I'm a migraine sufferer. And I had such a bad migraine and could not figure out why. And I listened to a podcast about migraines that talked about this really odd food allergy that is so strange and bizarre, called annatto, which is what makes cheese orange.
Okay.
And when I removed that dye, that vegetable dye out of my diet, I have essentially eliminated my migraines. And that
Wow.
came as a result of listening
Yeah.
to a podcast.
Yeah.
And so I walk the walk and talk the talk, but I just think if success means making impact and creating transformation and changing people's lives one voice at a time, like that's success to me.
I love that. That's beautiful. And I love the fact that, I think podcast, and you've been very humble about it, but podcasts are the fastest growing means of communication. I think it's outpacing radio and so many other media outlets as well. So For those lawyers out there as well, thinking if you're waiting back, like we so often tend to do in our profession, waiting to see how it plays out, you want to make sure that you don't miss the bandwagon. So jump on there. It's definitely the wave of the future, I think, for many reasons. Everybody now in our quick society, whether they're in their vehicle listening, when they're exercising and they're listening, it's an easy way to consume information. So I encourage you to get on that bandwagon. This has been fantastic, Traci. And I normally like to end by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be about this issue, just one of those aha moments that makes you think about something differently or show up differently.
Oh my gosh, I can answer that really easily without
Okay.
even preparation, which is done is better than perfect. And I have been so frozen throughout different areas of my life, and not making a decision is still making a decision,
Yeah.
which kind of comes in. It's two different philosophies, but they have a tendency to merge together when you're a
Yeah.
perfectionist. And I just think perfectionism is the undoing of
Yes.
our business growth, of our personal growth. And for me, I've owned and operated my own business for over 20 years and in almost a decade in just podcasting. But, I look back on some of the things that I waited on because I didn't think I could do it perfectly.
Yeah.
And then I just missed an opportunity. So I'm a big, big advocate for just done is better than perfect, and just starting where you are. That's the other thing too, is just, I think sometimes we think we have to wait to start something because we have to have
Yeah.
the right microphone, or we have to have the
Yeah.
right clothes, or we have to have the right degree, or we have to, whatever it is that you're waiting on to start, is
Yeah.
just no, just start where you are, and that'll crack open possibilities and opportunities, and the rest will fall into place.
Great advice for this audience in particular. I think there's a very strong tendency to procrastinate until we get that perfection. And especially for something like this, whether it's podcasting or some other kind of business marketing or developmental tool that you're looking at, just jump in, dabble with it, have fun with it. I've been certainly loving this podcast. So where can people learn more about you, Traci, if they're interested in
Yeah,
checking us
well,
out?
yeah, I mean, and speaking of start where you are, like, I love just having conversations with people about what's possible in podcasting. So the easiest thing to do would just be to go to produceyourpodcast.com, and you can schedule a call, or if you don't want to schedule a call, you can just fill out the contact form, but just start a conversation about having some of these questions answered. This is not it's, believe me, it's not a sales pitch. It's nothing like hardwired like that. It's just about getting you more information about what podcasting can do for you and for your business and for your life, because that it is my absolute passion for everybody to share their voice and make impact. And if we can do that by just having a conversation to start, I'd love
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I love that. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes, as well as any other contact info and information for you, so that you can maybe not procrastinate on this. Reach out while it's still fresh in your
So,
mind. So
yeah,
thanks so
just
much
have
for
a
joining us.
conversation.
Absolutely. It can't hurt you to have the conversation. So, or at least start
No.
thinking about this if it's something that you've never really contemplated before. I hope it's opened your perspective to a possibility that maybe you hadn't really thought about. So thanks so much, Traci, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on and letting me do what I love to do best, which is talk.
Yeah. Well, you picked the right profession, that's for sure. And for our listeners out there, I hope you got lots of value from this, that it opened your mind to thinking about other ways of showing up, other things that you can do for your business development, and also as a way to balance sometimes very stressful existence in this profession. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done that to Practicing with Purpose, and give the gift of sharing with anybody else that you think, oh, you know what? I know somebody who might actually really enjoy doing this or be interested, or it could really help boost them. So give that gift of sharing. Make sure to check out my book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation, if you have not done that as well. And before we sign off today, quickly, just want to share some ways we can work together. If you are looking to practice law with greater purpose or to improve your firm's culture and productivity, I've got everything from group to my signature one-on-one programs and experiences available to help you better leverage your innate power and that of your team, frankly, to be able to get more of what you want and deserve, and making a difference in doing that. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so that you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.